Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. Now for this one we're going to head over to America once again, to the state of Michigan and to the city of Grand Rapids. So those of you who are clued up on your American beers will know this brewery. We're going to go to Founders Brewing Company, who are one of the most revered American craft breweries that we get exported over to Europe, and we're going to have a taste of their Backwoods Bastard beer, which is the barrel aged version of their regular beer Dirty Bastard. This guy is only available in November, so do keep an eye out in November for this beer. It's got awesome ratings, so I'm sure it's going to be a really good one. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll take you through a very short history of the company. If you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward, it'll just be a few minutes in. The brewery website's in the video description for you below, along with a link to my other reviews that I've done from Founders, and I'm sure there will be more added to that in the fairly near future. So anyway, the Founders Brewing Company was founded in 1997, originally under the name Canal Street Brewing Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was founded by Mike Stephen and David Engbers, and these two guys were home brewing enthusiasts, and they had only recently graduated from university at this point, but they both had steady jobs, but they decided they wanted to follow their passion, like many people in the brewing industry do, and they drew up a business plan and took out hefty loans and quit their jobs as well to actually found what became the Founders Brewing Company. But in the 1800s, several breweries had actually operated in the Canal Street area of Grand Rapids, and this area is apparently now known as Monroe Avenue. But the original labels on the original Founders beers were black and white photos of the original Canal Street breweries with the words Founders above it, and thus the brewery became known as Founders Brewing Company. But in the early days the brewery ran very close to bankruptcy, and this was before they started brewing the kind of very flavourful beers that they're actually known for today. They were just brewing kind of quite well balanced but rather unspectacular ales, as they put it themselves. But this was when they decided to really change the style of brewing, and this is when they became famous for the kind of style of beers that they're now producing today, and they're actually rated as the 4th best brewery in the world by ratebeer.com. so as I say, a very kind of well revered brewery. But to tell you the company philosophy, this is a quote: "We don't brew beer for the masses, instead our beers are crafted for a chosen few, a small cadre of renegades and rebels who enjoy a beer that pushes the limits of what is commonly accepted as taste. In short, we make beer for people like us." But since the mid 2000s, since they took this step to change their brewing style, the brewery's grown substantially, and they're now producing 340,000 barrels of beer per year with constant expansion, and the sales market is constantly growing as well. And they do have a tap room at the brewery which overlooks the actual brewing facilities, so you can go in and get a view of what brewing beer is actually like, and they've got a whole host of food in there and stuff, so definitely worth checking out if you do go to Grand Rapids in Michigan. Meant to be a very, very nice town, but it's a part of America that I've never managed to visit. And they also actually have the Founders Fest as well, which they close down the street in front of the brewery, and you get a lot of live music and nice beer and things like that, so that's worth checking out as well. As I say, check out the brewery website and you get an idea of when all of these things are going on in Grand Rapids. To list a few of the other beers that you can get from these guys, in their year-round range you get the All Day IPA, the Centennial IPA, the Pale Ale, the Porter, and the Dirty Bastard Scotch Ale, which is the one I've reviewed for you before. In their year-round draft you get Red Rye IPA, the Nitro Pale Ale, Nitro Oatmeal Stout. They also have a seasonal range as well, so they have the Red Rye IPA in the bottled version from January to April, the Rubaeus, which is a raspberry ale which comes in May to August, and then you've got the Breakfast Stout, which is October to December. This guy is of a different range, and if you go on the website you get a calendar which tells you when all of these beers are available. They've got a whole host of different ones there, but in addition they've also got a speciality range which has an Imperial Stout, a Fisherman's Beer, and a Double Trouble Imperial IPA as well. And they've also got the Backstage series, which is experimental beer from the brewery. You will only find that in the tap room, and they also have a limited edition series as well, so as I say, keep an eye on the brewery website for that. But anyway, let's move on to the tasting of this beer. That's your kind of brief history and briefing of the company itself. As I told you at the start of this video, this guy is a Scotch ale. The Americans like to call this style a wee heavy. I think that's just because the Americans love accents, so they've probably taken the word wee heavy just because they like the way it sounds. But in Scotland we would normally call this style just a Scotch ale. But I find the American Scotch ales, the fruit flavours in them tend to be a little bit more candied and sugary, if that makes sense, rather than being a kind of darker and more figgy flavoured fruit. But that's just one of my personal observations. But this guy comes in at 10.2%, and as I said, it's a barrel-aged version of the regular beer, the Dirty Bastard Scotch Ale. So let me just bring up the camera and let you have a little look at the artwork on this one. It's got an old kind of wizard guy or something, or an old axeman. It actually looks quite cool. You can see there's just this guy up there. I think there's a lot of forestry and stuff goes on up in Michigan and things like that. So that's maybe what they're kind of referring to with this guy, the guy out in the woods chopping down the trees and stuff. There you can see it's quite nicely presented. The Dirty Bastard one has a tartan background and a fiery guy on it, if I remember rightly, and there is the standard Founders Brewing bottle cap. So looks very, very nice beer. Doesn't say anything else on the bottle. Yeah, no, so as I say, it's a 10.2% wee heavy, or Scotch ale as we would call it here. There's another style you get in Scotland, so we usually call Scotch ales either Scotch ales 80 shillings or 90 shillings. There are some 70 shilling beers as well, but the 70 shilling, from what I remember, is usually quite a bit lighter. I'll try and review some of those and talk about that in the later videos. But anyway, let's get on with the tasting of this guy. So this is the Backwoods Bastard from Founders. As you can see, nice, slightly smoky opening there. You can really smell the fruit coming off of this guy as you open it up. So we'll just get this guy out and into the glass. Try and get a wee bit of head on this guy. It always should have a little bit of head. As you can see, we've got a nice, maybe about a 3/4 finger or a finger of head coming out of this guy, but it looks really, really nice, and you can smell the fruit coming off this guy just as I've poured it. So as you can see, I'll bring up the light and just let you see the actual colour of this beer. As you can see, it's poured a nice kind of dark mahogany, maybe a chestnut colour actually, is the best way to describe this. If I hold it up to the light, it does have a kind of ruby tinge, and there is a good bit of sediment floating around in the bottom of this bottle, maybe just because I've cellared it for a little while. I've had this bottle since, I think, November 2014, I'm sure. I think my friend bought me this one. So yeah, it looks very, very nice. As you can see, there was a 3-finger head on that. It's somewhere between beige and a kind of creamy colour actually, so quite an interesting looking beer. There's not much visible carbonation in it, but I think that's just because of how dark the beer is. As I said, a dark kind of chestnutty colour with a sort of ruby tint to it, but you can see some bubbles just going up towards the bottom of that head. There's none of them really sticking to the side of the glass, but anyway, let's have a look at the aroma. So you've got some really dark roasted caramel in there. That's the most poignant thing that's coming out of this beer. A lot of dark roasted brown sugars. So a big caramel malty aroma coming out of it. You can smell the alcohol in this as well. Sometimes you just get a really boozy whiff from it, but you can definitely smell the bourbon. I always find bourbon whiskey is a little bit sweeter and a little bit fruitier than Scotch whiskey. Our whiskey is a bit darker and more peaty, I would say. But you can definitely smell that in here. It doesn't smell peaty, but it does smell quite boozy actually, and it has that kind of fruit tint to it. It's almost like a little bit of a cherry smell actually comes off it. That's what I always think bourbon has a smell of, just a little bit of sort of cherry or something like that. But you've got a big roasted element in here too, like I'm saying, a big roasted brown sugar malt. There is a little bit of chocolate, but you are definitely getting that sort of spicy, woody note as well. So there's a definite vanilla presence in there. If you sugar it up a bit and take your smelling a little bit back from the glass, you can pick up the vanilla and woody flavours. But the main thing in this is there's a lot of dark fruit in this guy coming out too. So you're getting a very sharp sort of raisin or plummy thing, and I think there's perhaps a little bit of cherry in there. As I say, that might be an aroma from the sort of American bourbon barrels, because bourbon is very different from Scotch whisky, of course. But yeah, without further ado, it smells very nice. As I always say, Scotch ales are very complex beers, so do take a little bit of time and just smell the aroma before you actually taste it. But anyway, this is the Backwoods Bastard from Founders Brewing Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Slàinte. Now that's very nice actually. Very smooth beer, I would say. The fruit isn't quite as prominent as it was, as I remember it being in the Dirty Bastard actually. The alcohol warmth, the first impression I'm getting of it is that it's very smooth, but the alcohol warmth is actually very well hidden in this, which is quite good. A lot of Scotch ales you can feel the alcohol warmth with the caramel malts, and you do feel it a little bit, but it's actually remarkably smooth and remarkably well hidden, I would say. But yeah, in terms of flavour with this guy, you've got a nice, rich, caramel malt in this one. It's actually very roasted, and the caramel malt just sits in the middle of the tongue there, and it's quite sweet. And it's actually, you can feel the roasted character. There's just a sort of line that goes down the middle of the tongue there that has a nice roasted element to it. But the caramel malt is just kind of quite smooth and sits on either side of that, but you've got a nice roasted, toasty element that just goes right down the middle of the tongue. Yeah, the roasted character complements the caramel quite well. There might be a bit of a bready element to it. As you take a few more sips, you get this feeling of bready character that kind of builds up in the palate there, and it's really nice. But you're getting this kind of fruity, oily bubble that moves towards the front of the tongue, and that's where you're getting the dark fruits. It's actually coming out as more of a kind of figgy flavour on this one, but there are some sharper elements to it as well. There is a little bit of a kind of spicy character to it, and again, that is a kind of character I find with bourbon rather than Scotch whisky. You get this little sort of spicy element from the wood. You can pick up the wood and vanilla flavours, particularly just before you get right to the edge of the palate. That, I think, is where the vanilla and the oaky flavours are lying, but there's a little bit of a spice to it, I think, and that's actually quite good, because Scotch whisky, I find, has a kind of spicy base to it as well, and the Scotch ales that we get here tend to be a bit more bready and a little bit of cereal kind of flavour in them. So this is actually closer to a Scotch ale, or an original Scotch ale, than the Dirty Bastard is, in my opinion. But yeah, it's a really nice beer. There's maybe perhaps just a teeny little bit of chocolate in there, but mainly it's a dark roasted caramel that I'm really getting out of this guy. And this is a lot closer to a kind of Scottish Scotch ale than a lot of the American versions I've had, actually. This is a really nice beer. And I hope you'll take my word for it, being a Scotsman, that this is actually a very good Scotch ale. But yeah, there's a definite, as I say, you're getting that nice roasted line down the middle of your tongue, some nice caramel, and the bready presence is building up as you go through it. But just before you get to the edges of the tongue, you've got a nice smooth vanilla flavour and that woody flavour to it as well, which has just a little bit of spicy character. And as I say, I think that's the sort of American oak that you're getting out there, and it's really nice. But you've got a really nice figgy fruit flavour that comes towards the front of the tongue, but there are some sharper elements from the plums and raisins too, but I think mainly a figgy flavour. And in the aftertaste, you've just got a little bit of that roasted character, but the thing that's lingering for me is a sort of slightly cherryish, which, as I say, is a bourbon kind of flavour. You've got a kind of cherryish bourbon flavour that just sits in the mouth, and that nice roasted character from the thing, but there's a definite caramel element just lingers there in the aftertaste. But yeah, they're definitely, as you go through it, there's a definite element of earthy hop character, just starts to push through, but it's not too prominent. It is a kind of subtle flavour, but that's what a kind of regular Scotch ale is like. It's perhaps a bit more punchy. But I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a really good beer, and probably one of the closest American takes on the Scotch ale that I've found. One of the closest American takes to being a Scotch ale, if that makes sense. But it's beautiful. In terms of the mouthfeel, like I said, it's full-bodied, it's very clean and very smooth. It's got a nice oily mouthfeel, very kind of silky actually, and it works really well with the vanilla and oaky flavours particularly. And the caramel, despite it being very roasted, it's not very dry. It's actually a nice wet beer, so it's quite a Scotch ale to me is a tasting beer or a dessert beer, but this is actually kind of quite refreshing, even though it is so heavy. But you do get a little bit of alcohol warmth as you take a few more sips, but as I said, it's actually very well disguised. So I mean, overall, this is a really beautiful beer, and it's been really cool to return to the Founders Brewing Company. So what I would say, keep an eye out for this guy. As I said, I think it is a November availability that you get this one. The Dirty Bastard is a really nice beer as well, but in my opinion on that one, the fruits are a bit more sort of candied and sugary than you would expect from a regular Scotch ale. This is a lot closer to what I would expect from a Scotch ale brewed in Scotland, so I would highly recommend this beer. It's really beautiful, and you know, to me this is a really nice tasting beer. You want to enjoy one of these in front of a warm fire or something like that after a day skiing. That's probably when I would want to do this beer. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. Please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer. It's been really cool to return to Michigan and Founders again, so I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. Please like, subscribe, share, let me know your own thoughts on the beer, and I will catch you soon with my next review. Cheers!